Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're in the bottom paragraph of page 1364. So after the last 8-9 pages explaining the Zoh and Malchus, Mashpia Makabel, and how Malchus, especially Malchus, is its own unique entity, what he calls an hamakabel, which is interesting. He doesn't just say clay hamakabel, not just the container, but also an like he explained clearly that there's an and keli in Malchus, but the is an makabel. And the example, even though there's 3 levels in it, the moon and the bright stone and vision, eyesight, sight, yet the moon reflects that aspect that there's an there, especially according to the second opinion, that the moon has its own light, but it doesn't shine on its own without it being triggered. So it's a very interesting entity because it's somewhat of a, you say it's but you say it's makabel. Usually is reserved for mashpia, and keli is for makabel, but here it's also makabel. So it's an energy form, and a divine energy at that, as I explained at length. Just wanted to add one more thing in that context before we read on. It also adds another dimension in the interface between God and existence, between the divine and existence, which is, of course, the central theme of Ayin Beis. Why? Because the key to a proper interface is that you want the integrity of each entity to be preserved. You don't want one annihilating the other or compromising the other. In other words, if it's just godliness like before the tzimtzum and ignores existence or overrides the tzimtzum and existence, that's not a true interface. If it's primarily on the terms of existence and the divine is limited in its expression, so there again, you don't have a full interface. So the more you can find ways to integrate, the more powerful is the achdus, the Hashem Echad, the achdus Hashem that's achieved through our Aveda, as we integrate and interface between the two realities, divine consciousness and our consciousness. So, if you recall when we spoke about Ein Oid, in addition to Havayu Elikim, where we're there, the primary force is Oir, Havaya. But Havayu Hu Elikim, that the Tzimtzum too is not a contradiction. The Tzimtzum too is Bishvil and gets transformed into being a force of the Gili Elikus. But the focus is still Gili, revelation. Then came the higher level, Ein Oid, that the Tzimtzum itself reveals, the Kalim, the root of the Kalim reveal Helama Atzmi. But we learned that even in the Kalim, in the Rishimu, there's also 2 things. There's the Helama Atzmi, but there's also the Oir is concealed there. So again, you have both Oir and Kali in there. But the point I wanted to make is that understanding that the Makabel has also Oir in it makes the interface even more powerful, because it's not just that it's a container for the Oir, it itself also has a form of energy. It's just the energy, what we call the energy of a recipient, of an absorber. It's not energy of less klum on its own, it won't shine. So it just internalizes more. When you do transform Malchus, you're actually transforming it itself. It's not just becoming a secondary, a channel for something else. At the same time that it's a channel for what's higher and generated from below, as we learned, the halos man of our Aveda, there's also Malchus itself is an entity created by God. So it itself is being transformed. It's more internalized. So now, when we're going to be learning, as we started yesterday, that in Malchus itself is the 3 levels, the Ur Alavona, the Ur of the Eventev, and the Ur of Riyas Ayin. So you see even furthermore how we're now dissecting and internalizing the concept of divine energy, even in Malchus itself, 3 levels. Not just that it's drawing down levels from Zoh, but Malchus itself. Well, we're going to learn this in extreme detail, but ultimately the result of it all will be that as we, through our Aveda, as we refine and elevate our lives, we are refining and elevating Malchus. We mature its development as it grows to the point where it becomes equal to Zoh, to the point that it becomes even higher than Zoh, like the mother that's Mashpia. to the point that it's einoid, where it reaches all the way to the Helam Ha'atzmi, of the root of it all. So what's happening is that we now are going to be learning how in Malchus itself, we have aspects, ingredients, you can say, or different levels that help us understand how this Eir Makabel works. So now, going back to what we learned yesterday, just to sum up, he said, Omnam yesh bezeh, after explaining Malchus in general as an Eir Makabel, in this itself, there are three levels, and they are, for example, the moon, the bright stone, and eyesight, and vision, sight, are all examples for these three levels within Malchus. Now, we began learning that Isa b'ksavim in the Maimer from the Mittler Rebbe, ve'nenu me'ires, it says that these three levels are the three levels of Beriya, Yetzirah, Asiyah. The example of the moon is for the Beriya. Malchus of Beriya is like the moon, moonlight. Malchus of Yetzirah is like the Evan, and Malchus of Asiyah is Bechinas Ayin, like the eye, vision, sight. And additionally, V'no it's Seifim B'tchiloson, even though the sight is in Asiyah, it is rooted, it's wedged in the beginning, that in Malchus of Asiyah, there's Malchus de Beriya. There's something that's even higher than Malchus of Beriya that we see in the moonlight, which of course we shall discuss as we learn further. So that's where we stopped. The fourth line in the new paragraph on page 1364, and that's where we'll continue now. So the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along. There's the scanned pages that we're learning here. And we discussed earlier, so I pointed out yesterday, that is on page 1354 and 1355. What was discussed there, or actually even earlier than that, really start of 1352 through 1355. So what did we learn there? What is the difference between these three dimensions? They're all Eir Makabel. What does that mean? That they're not self-contained luminaries, meaning the power to illuminate others and outside of themselves. They definitely have light, but they're all a light that's dependent on a mashpia. The moon, of course, even if it has light on its own, it needs the sun for it to shine, to trigger it, or the sun channels through it. The stones, they're not bright of their own. They're not luminaries. They assume the property of the stars, the sun, as we learned earlier. And they assume it, they absorb it and acquire the quality of, so there's a certain brightness to them. Eyesight does not shine either. In a dark room, you need a light to support them and allow you to see. But if there's a light, then the eye can see. The ears don't see. So the eye has a certain translucence that allows it to see, so light does shine through it, and the eye itself sees. So all of them have an aspect of light, but they're all Eir Makabel, not Mashpia. So now what we learned, what was the difference between them? The Levone B'chinas Moir. Levone is a Moir. Like the Pasuk says, the verse says, Ma'eres Hagdelim. It's one of the two luminaries. It's considered a luminary, not just Oir. It's not just light, it's a Moir. Like we see at night, that it's a light that illuminates the darkness. We're not getting now how the light gets triggered. But the bottom line is the moon shines at night, and you can walk and follow. The moonlight can allow you to see, and you can move around and do whatever. It's not as bright as the sun, obviously. It's not daylight, but it still shines at night. However, it's an Eir Makabel, because it doesn't radiate and illuminate on its own. After it receives the light of the sun, that transmits within it, I'm sorry, my mistake. It gets darkened within the moon. What does that mean? It's not quite as bright as it is in the sun. The moon filters it, so to speak, and it becomes similar to moonlight. Like we said, even if the sun is shining through it, it doesn't look like the sun. It's not as bright. So, nechshir and gets changed, and it gets changed commensurate to the mahus, the personality of the moon. So it is a moed, it is a source of light but it's not a source of light on its own. It needs the sun to shine through it, and then the moon transforms that sunlight into moonlight, so to speak, and that radiates, and then it's Meir. That's the sun. That's the moon, sorry. That's the moonlight. The Evan Tev is not like that. The Evan Tev, even if it shines a little and you could see something, but it's not there, you don't call it a moir. It's not a luminary. What is the Evan Tev? Here, it's more the absence, that darkness cannot completely keep it covered. Like there's a stone that does not shine, so that's completely dark in the night. If you don't have light, it doesn't shine. There are stones that have a certain luminescence to them, and they're able to glow. It also radiates, clearly not as much as the moon, but it does shine in the area where you're standing near near that stone. It is radiating, illuminating the darkness. And the air that's in it, it's been acquired, either the light of the sun or the light of the stars, based on how it's explained in the Midrashim in different places, that from Zohar, I think we discussed it, how the stones are actually reflections in some way. They assume these properties from either the sunlight or the starlight. But back there, just to elaborate a bit, I'm just looking. I want to see how you distinguish between the stone and the moon. Yeah. One of the key things he said was the moon, it ends up being the moonlight. It's its own light, where the stone never becomes really a source of light, even though it may shine. It just acquires the luminous and luminous properties. That was the key. Whereas the moon itself shines. It shines with the power of the sun, but it becomes a force that shines, a luminary that shines at night. That was the difference. So that's number two. The ayin, and the third level, the eye, meaning the eye that sees, eyesight, vision. That's b'chlal not a meir. The first two both illuminate. One is a luminary, and one is not a luminary, but they both light. The eye does not shine. The press proof is in a dark room. Your eye will not shine. Does not give off any beams of light. You can't see in a dark room without an outside light. It needs support. It needs something that illuminates the area, and then the eye can see. And then he's able to see. But here, there's something unique about the eye that the moon and the stone do not have. Meaning, there's an actual power in the eye to see. It needs light to be able to actualize it. But when it comes to the moon and the stone, as we learned, they both don't have the faculty of seeing something. The moon doesn't see, neither does the stone. Here, there's the element of eyesight. To go back to page 1355, where the way he explained it there, he said like this. Yeah, it doesn't have the power of the moon. He talks about the flaw. The moon is superiority to it, but it does have the power to see. So the eye itself is a faculty of vision to see. At the end of the day, the makabel. So it's a makabel because it needs support of light. But it's a mashpia in the sense that the eye itself can see, and we're going to learn the difference soon in Avodah and Ruchnius and so on, and we'll see the real significance. Whereas the moon, even though on one hand it's a luminary, but it never becomes a force that sees things. It could support the eye to see, but it itself does not become seeing. We'll soon see why the ayin is so important, because it's ultimately the eye that sees. That when we talk about seeing godliness, it's the ayin that's going to be, and that's why ve'neinu me'iris, the eyes that will shine like the light of the sun and the light of the moon. So that's going to be a unique power of light. But we'll discuss and learn that as we go later. That's why, if you recall, when he started explaining the whole thing, he was really coming to explain eyesight, the light of Beriya. Then to explain that, he went to explain the contrast to the moon and to the bright stone. But it all began really by explaining what the eye is like. Yeah. I'm looking at page 1352 and 1353. Yeah, especially on 1354, if you remember that the eye is also, it's not just that the eye is dependent on the light around it. The health of your eyesight is a key to vision. He said, so you see that the eye itself, when you have 20/20 vision, that allows a person to see even with a little light and to see distance. That doesn't exist in the world of the moon or the world of a bright stone. Here you see the eye itself has that faculty. That he explained on page 1354. I just wanted to reiterate that, and that's what an eye has that the moon and the bright stone do not have. It's elaborated on page 1354. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Okay. Tzarich siyua ma'ir hameir v'ozu roya acha'eru ma'atzmei hainu mekuach hariyeh shabai. So even though it needs light to illuminate the room for it to see it, especially today, but what is the power of seeing is not coming from some other force. It's not the sun or the moon or a candle or any other light that causes the eye to see. The eye has the power to see on its own. It just needs light to be able to manifest that sight. But it's not the light, because if you, for example, God forbid, if a person didn't have eyes or is blind, it doesn't matter how much light there is in the room, they won't see. So eye itself has the power to see. And it's also called a moed, like we learned, when we say moed einayim, the luminary of eyes, the eyes that have a luminary. We said, he explained that on the bottom of page, when he spoke about moed einayim, a summa. That was the page I just referred to. Page 1354. So where did he say moed? I think at the bottom of the page. Yeah. The bottom of it
yeah. Is me'or einayim yesamach lev.
Yeah, but the point he wants to make is that it's also called a moed. That's the key. Me'or einayim. Good. So now that he's established these three levels and briefly summed up the difference between them, as I said, it's more elaborate back in the pages I just referred to, pages 1352 through 1355. I repeat it again. So now starts a long discussion what this is. What does this mean in the spiritual level, in Avodah, in our service of God, and so on. He's going to explain, as he says, let's read on. Well, before I continue, any questions? Let me stop for questions before we go to the next section. Okay. Yesh Levaira Inyan, 2 lines from the bottom of page 1364. And we can explain the Inyan in this, Alpi Hagdoma, according to by first introducing Hamavur b'Mokamacher, that which is explained elsewhere, b'Mashakosa b'Pri Eitz Chaim. What it says in Pri Eitz Chaim from the Arizal, Shar Hanhogis Halimud. So Pri Eitz Chaim is divided in different sections on the prayers, on different intentions, Kavonas HaMitzvahs, Kavonas HaTfilah, and so on. But there's a thing called Shar Hanhogis Halimud, a gate that's dedicated to how to learn Torah, Hanhogis Halimud. The attitude, the behavior, Hanhogis of how Limud Torah. And it discusses Be'inyan, Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud. So he's going to explain this inyan of these 3 levels that we just described, which are the examples for them: the moon, the luminescent stone, and the eye and vision, according to what he says in Pri Eitz Chaim in the inyan of Mikrah. Mikrah is the word for Torah Biksav. When you say Mikrah, is Chumash or Tanakh. Mikrah, the Psukim, all the Tanakh really. Mishnah is Torah Shabbat, but it's from the Tanoim called Mishnah, Mishnah, and Talmud is the Gemara that explains the Mishnah. So in the Kisra, in Pri Eitz Chaim, he explains what's the difference between these 3. We know there's a difference. We know everything starts with the Psukim in the Torah. Lekem remizad, lekem remizad b'araisa. Yeah, there's no in.
Lekem midei de lo remizad b'araisa.
Lekem midei de lo remizad b'araisa. There's nothing in the Gemara that's not merumiz, that's not hinted to or alluded to in Chumash. Everything starts Mikrah Moleh HaKosov, Shenamar, Kamosha Kosov. You see, all the Mishnah and Gemara will always bring verses. So Mikrah is the basis. Mishnah is Torah Shebal Peh, Torah B'Pirusha Nitna, the explanation of the verses. And the Talmud is explanation of the Mishnah. That's on a very basic level. What does this mean on higher levels? So he says, the Talmud Beriya. Talmud, the level of Talmud is in the world of Beriya. Mishnah be Yetzirah. Mishnah is in Yetzirah. Mikrah be Asiyah. And Mikrah is in the world of Asiyah. Now, you'd think it would be the opposite, but it's not correct, because Mikrah Yetzirah Midei Pshuta. Remember, Mikrah is Pshat. And Pshat is literal, it's the surface level of an interpretation. Once you go to, let's say, it says also in Kabbalah that Pshat, Remez, Drusah, there's also the 4 worlds. Pshat is Asiyah, like Mikrah. Remez and Drush is Beriya, Yetzirah and Beriya, and there's 2 opinions which is which. And Sod, the secret, Kabbalah, Primis HaTorah is Atzilus. That's not relevant to our discussion, just wanted to make the comparison. So why is Mikrah Asiyah? Because Mikrah is how God conveyed Torah, literally in the stories and in the verses that we have that are written down in a physical way. So even though its root, as we said before, is in a very high place, but where's its location, so to speak, in the worlds? Its geographic location spiritually is Asiyah.
Like I said yesterday, the highest to the lowest.
Asiyah is the lowest world. The world is the world of action.
And then this is the highest.
Mishnah is the world is Mishnah is in Yetzirah, and Talmud is in Beriya. Okay. The Isa b'Pri Eitz Chaim, and it says b'Pri Eitz Chaim Sham, and it says there now on page 1365. In Pri Eitz Chaim, there, Shara Nogas Alimud, he says like this: the Talmud Sheberiya who Pirasha Mishnayis. V'amaso matnu pilpul. He distinguishes that the Talmud in Beriya is the interpretation of Mishnah. Like when you learn Gemara, you see right away, the Gemara takes sections of the Mishnah and then explains it. Throughout the Gemara, it starts with the first Mishnah in Brachos. From when we're allowed to say Shema in the evening. So the Gemara will start, and then the Mishnah continues. Then the Gemara will take a line like Me'emes HaKohen Shema and begin to elaborate on it. So it's the Pirusha Mishnayis, V'amaso mat n'pilpul. Masamat means the back and forth negotiations, so to speak, between the the Amoraim, as they are trying to elaborate and understand the Mishnah, or pilpul. Pilpul is again their discussion and their analysis. That's what it says in the Beriya Chaim is Talmud Beriya. Aval hadin shebet Talmud. Remember, Talmud also has another part to it, the dinim. There's also parts of the Talmud that are not purely interpretation of the Mishnah. They're actually a din, a halacha, could be brought in the Talmud. You don't pass them from there, but there's dinim, there are laws there. V'shara memris, and the other sections in the Talmud, she'enam bir ala Mishnah, the ones that are not an explanation of the Mishnah, so the Beriya Chaim says, hein b'chlal Mishnah. Even though it's in the Gemara, that too is part of the Mishnah. Meaning it's also in the world of Yetzirah, not Beriya. So that which explains the Mishnah and all the elaboration is in the world of, that's called Talmud. The parts of the Talmud that are halal dinim, that are not an explanation of the Mishnah, are also in the category of Mishnah. That's what he says. Because obviously the Talmud explaining the Mishnah means it's the next level. We'll soon understand. I mean, I gave a simple explanation why Mikrah is Asiyah. But basically, the more you explain an Inyan and Torah, the deeper you're going into it. Remember, Talmud is Havon of Asogah, and Beriya is generally Bina. It's understanding. Mishnah is also some understanding, but it's very brief. So it's Yetzirah. The Psukim are the least ones understood. It's just the basic information. You're just getting the verses, and they need explanation. So that's Asiyah. It's like the practical, we'll call it the outer dimension. That expression in this world, that's the world of Asiyah. The Torah was given a Mikrah Yetzirah Midei Pshutei, the literal interpretation. Okay. But listen, let's continue. He's going to explain what this means now. Somebody wants to ask something? In the middle of speaking. If you have a question about this, just wait. We're in the middle of literally developing what it says in Beriya Chaim. But I'll stop if somebody wants to ask something. V'sham, it continues what he says in Beriya Chaim. In Beriya Chaim, he explains the Hakol Hein Benukfa. All these three, Mikrah, the verse, Mishnah, and Talmud, they're all in the level of Nukva. They're all Malchus. Remember we said before, Malchus of Asiyah, Malchus of Yetzirah, Malchus of Beriya. Talmud b'chinas Malchus de Beriya. In other words, Talmud is the level of Malchus of Beriya. Mishnah b'chinas Vav Ktsavis, the Malchus de Yetzirah. And the Mishnah is 6 facets within Malchus of Yetzirah. And elsewhere it explains the Mikrah, Mishnah v'Talmud, and Chabad, Chagas, Nehi Datzilus. Okay, so in Beriya Chaim, he calls it Malchus. He actually doesn't mention Mikrah here. He just mentions Talmud and Mishnah. I have to look up what it says there. But elsewhere, there's a different way. Mikrah, Mishnah, and Talmud is Chabad, Chagas, Nehi Datzilus. A different explanation. It's not a contradiction. It's just another way that's explained. Chabad is Talmud. I'm sorry, the other way around. Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud seems to be Chabad is Mikrah, Chagas is Mishnah, and Nehi, is Talmud. Hainu, Mikrah Chabad Datzilus, Mishnah Chagas, the Talmud Nehi Datzilus. So it's a different explanation. So we have here 2 explanations. One is from Beriya Chaim that Mikrah, Mishnah, Talmud is the Malchus of Asiyah, the Malchus of Yetzirah, the Malchus of Beriya, respectively. From the bottom up, Mishnah, Mikrah being Malchus of Asiyah, Mishnah Malchus of Yetzirah, and Talmud Malchus of Beriya. And so elsewhere it explains that Mikrah is Chabad of Atzilus, Chachma Bina Das. Mishnah is Chagas, the Midas, Chesed Gvur Tefers of Yetzirah, of Atzilus, and Talmud is Netzach Ched Yesod of Atzilus. Now, he's going to obviously explain, because you could argue that seems like a contradiction. First of all, in Beriya Chaim, it seems it's from the bottom up. Mikrah is the lowest level. According to the other place, Mikrah is the highest level, Chabad. The second thing, here they're all in Atzilus, and here it's the three worlds of Beriya, Yetzirah, Asiyah. So all this is going to be explained and developed, so just be patient. No reason to rush. The Rebbe Rashab is going to now explain. Acha inyan, what's the inyan in this? You could even say that's an answer. Seemingly, he didn't pose it as a question, he just brought two different explanations. But when you say acha inyan, it often means that we need an explanation here. So however, the inyan in this is like this.
Even in brings two things. He brings in Atzilus itself, Chabad, Chagas, Nehi.
I just said
Malchus the Atzilus.
Now, Malchus about, where does he say Malchus of Atzilus, if I may ask?
Before, ושם דהקר הם בנוקו, רק שתלמוד מבחינת מלכוס דברייה, ומשנה מבחינת מלכוס דיצירה. Okay.
He didn't bring Atzilus, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So, inyan, the inyan of this is the hine isa beitz chaim. Now, this is classic Ayin Beis and Rebbe Rashab style, where he develops a whole inyan, brings many sources, and is going to explain it all. So now he's bringing a third thing. It says in Eitz Chaim, the b'chinas Chabad, Chagas, Nehi, Klulim Gamke Miyud. That the three, let's just step back a moment. The structure of every world has 10 spheres, as we know. The 10 spheres themselves break into many different structures. One of them, the classic, of course, is Chabad, the three cognitive, Chochma, Bina, Das. The next is Chesed, Gvura, Teferetz, and then Netzach, Chod, Yesod. Sometimes Malchus is included there too. Here he's now talking about Chabad, Chagas, Nehi, which correspond to Reish, Guf, Regel, the head, the torso, the body, and the Regel, the legs. So it's Chabad, Chagas, Nehi. Now he says, in Eitz Chaim, he says that though each of these consists of 3 spheres, yet each one encompasses all, it is made up of 10, which we know, it's called Iskalus. Just like there's Chesed, there's Chesed Sheba Chesed, there's Gvura Sheba Chesed. So each of these, so Isa Chabad has 10 spheres in Chabad, 10 spheres in Chagas, 10 spheres in Nehi. V'hainu, sheb'chinas Chabad, yesh gam ken Chagas Sheba Chabad. In Chabad itself, but here the interesting twist is not just Chabad has Chochma Sheba Chochma, Bina Sheba Chochma, and so on. In the structure called Chabad, there's Chagas Sheba Chabad, the Nehi Sheba Chabad. So Chabad consists of the Chabad Sheba Chabad, the Chagas Sheba Chabad, and the Nehi Sheba Chabad. So in Chabad itself, in Chochma Bina Das of the cognitive faculties and attributes, you also have the others. The Chen B'Chagas. And the same is true in the world of Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. Yes, Chabad v'Nehi. There's also Chabad in Chagas and Nehi in Chagas. Well, the same is true, of course, with Nehi. He doesn't spell it out, but it's obvious. And then he continues. The Eitz Chaim says furthermore, Umebchinas Nehi she'b'Chabad. So now, when you look in Chabad, it has 3 sections within Chabad. The Chabad within Chabad, the Chagas within Chabad, and the Nehi within. So he says the lowest 3, the Nehi within Chabad, from there, Nimsha Chabad she'b'Nehi. So this Iskalus also creates an interrelationship between these 3. So Chabad is here, and Chagas is here, and Nehi is here. From the Nehi of Chabad becomes the Chabad of Nehi. So it's not just they're encompassed, they actually interact that way. It's basically from the lower of a higher level becomes the higher in the lower level. This is also sometimes said that from Malchus of Chesed comes Chesed within Malchus. Or from Bigvura of Chesed comes Gvura Sheba Chesed, comes Chesed within Gvura. But here he's talking about it this way. This is what the Eitz Chaim is saying. So from the Nehi within Chabad, Nimshach Chabad Sheba Nehi, U'Nehi Sheba Chagas, Nimshach Chagas Sheba Nehi. Which makes total sense because when you think about interrelationships, think of a chain, links in a chain. So the lower part of a higher link becomes the upper part of the next link. Or like when you're climbing the stairs or a ladder, that the higher rung becomes the step from which you step down to the lower rung. So essentially, the lower part, the Nehi within Chabad, becomes the Chabad within Nehi. Now, let me explain it a little in Chabad language, if I may, because this is just technical words. So I'll explain it. I think he may explain. Let me just see if he explains. If he explains it, I won't explain it. I mean, he should. Yeah. Okay, before we read on, let me just explain. This, to put it in simple psychological terms, we know, just to, the difference between Chabad, Chagas, and Nehi is the difference between the cognitive, the emotional, and the behavioral. Nehi is also midas, but it's the behavioral end. It's like the lower part of midas as they come into, as they're in a level of execution and implementation. So when you contemplate an idea, as we've learned many times, that idea is still on a cerebral level, it's theoretical. But it can lead you to say, you know what, the thing you're contemplating on is a good thing. And your midas gets stimulated and say, now that I understand and appreciate something, I'm being drawn and attracted to it. So the moichen lead to midas. That's Chabad leading to Chagas. We're not talking about impulsive emotions that come on their own. We're talking about emotions that are a result of a contemplation. So how does this work? Moichen itself is objective and detached from feelings. When you understand something properly, you should not be subjectively attached or connected to it. It's somewhat detached. But from there gives birth. So what we say is that from the Chagas in Chabad becomes the Chabad within Chagas. In the mind gets a stimulation, a certain excitement. That's still the midas within your seichel. But that will give birth from the midas in seichel, which is still seicheldik. It's still on a level of intelligence, will become the intelligence of the midas. And that will direct the midas till they become actual emotions. So in other words, that everything is included in the other. It's the same thing with Nehi. Nehi is the result, the behavioral aspect of it. What's the result of chesed? So that comes into netzach. The result of Gvura is in Hoyd. The result of Tiferes is in Yesod. So when you come to the point that you're not just loving and kind, but you're actually acting on it, like Chesed is a driving force of love, Netzach is a determination. So when that's coming, it's coming also the same way. They first originate as they are on a higher level. So in the higher level is starting to give birth and emerging an aspect of the lower level, and then literally like a mother carrying a child. First, the child is part of the mother, and then the child becomes independent. But that independence is also, it's carrying the genes of the mother even when it becomes independent. So there's the level where it's encompassed first in a higher level. The lower level is encompassed, and from the way it's included, so to speak, in the womb or in the original state, just like you think of branches of a tree. If you ever watch a tree grow, it's very slow, but if you sped it up, so one branch will branch into many branches. Where were those branches before? They were all included in that one branch, but it was concealed. As that branch develops and grows, it will start growing the branches first slowly, and then it'll become a branch of its own. So you could say that the outer branch is an outgrowth of the inner branch, so to speak, or its original branch. That's on a very physical level, but more on a more psychological level. It's essentially that which exists in the higher level. The lower part of the higher level will give birth to the higher part in the lower level. That's what he's essentially saying. So therefore, Nehi too is an outgrowth of the Nehi from Chabad becomes the Chabad within Nehi. So when you're thinking about an idea and it's completely detached from emotions, that's Chabad within Chabad. When your mind is beginning to relate to the emotions of it, not that you're feeling it, it's not emotions, it's still cognitive, but the cognitive is beginning to talk about emotion. That's Chagas within Chabad. When the mind is thinking, how am I going to act on it? How am I going to express it? In actuality, that's Nehi within Chabad. But it's all within Chabad. So the Nehi within Chabad, how you contemplate in your mind, how you're going to express it, will become the Chabad that will govern and direct that expression. And the same thing with Chagas and Nehi. Chagas is more the core emotion. Nehi is the practical application of that emotion. So the Nehi within Chagas will become the Chagas within Nehi.
Why not the Chabad shebenehi? First, it's going Chabad.
I just explained Chabad shebenehi.
No, he's saying that menehi shebechagas nimshach.
Chagas shebenehi. Are you following?
Yeah. But my question is this: why the first thing is coming Chabad? Why not from the Nehi shebechagas should not be nimshach the Chabad shebenehi? Why Chagas?
That's what he says. With all due respect, read inside. That's what he just said. He said exactly that.
I know.
What? So what are you asking? That's what he said. That Nehi from Chabad becomes Chabad of Nehi. He just said that.
That makes sense. But why from Nehi shebechagas is not coming Chabad shebenehi?
Because Chagas has nothing to do with Chabad. You need Chagas in Nehi. You need Nehi to have Chabad and Chagas. I just explained this at length. Chabad is moichin, is cognitive. Chagas is emotions. From the Nehi, the practical side, the behavioral side of Chagas becomes the Chagas within Nehi. That's the relationship. What does that have to do with Chabad? Chabad is not Chagas.
Because
anyway,
also
I have
Nehi,
no idea what you're asking.
No, I'm asking you. Nehi is not having Chabad. There is
Chabad. From Chabad of Nehi comes, I don't understand. From Nehi of Chabad comes Chabad of Nehi. From Chagas, from Nehi within Chagas becomes Chagas of Nehi.
Okay.
I'm not.
No, my question is in Nehi.
Let's not. Listen. There's other people in the class. We're going in circles here. It's to me very simple logic. I'm not sure what you're asking.
There's no Chabad in Nehi, Reb Simon.
Yes, it comes from Nehi. Shebe Chabad becomes Chabad. Shebe Nehi. I just said that. It's like, who's on first here? I'm not. Does anyone want to weigh in here? Or what? I'm not clear even what the question is. He said, in Nehi there is Chabad, there's Chagas and Nehi. In Chabad there's Chabad, Chagas and Nehi. In Chagas there's Chabad, Chagas and Nehi. Is that clear? Yeah. Now, how does it happen? From the Nehi within Chabad becomes the Chabad within Nehi. From the Chagas, Nehi within Chagas becomes the Chagas within Nehi. What's not clear? And I just explained the logic of it. What's not clear here? I'm not sure.
The logic, because everything is having Chabad, Chagas, Nehi. Chabad is having it, Chagas is having it, Nehi is having it. So it's just from Nehi shebechagas, the first thing is coming the Chabad shebenehi, not the Chagas shebenehi.
I really don't understand what you're saying. It doesn't make sense to me, and I'm reading what it says here and explaining what it says here. So anyway, so it says like this. It says like that. As I just explained, from the behavioral within the cognitive comes the cognitive within the behavioral, and from the behavioral within the emotional, the emotional within the behavioral. So also Nehi has also all 10. It has Chabad in it and Chagas. So Chabad has all 10, Chagas has all 10, and Nehi has all 10. Obviously, when he says 10, he means Malchus too, even though he doesn't mention it, but that makes it into 10. Rak kishein derech klal. So yet there's still the prominent personality, the prominent dimension in each one of them is derech klal. Rak shein derech klal v'slapshe zeh b'zeh. In general terms, and the way they manifest to one another, Ozai derech klal nikra Chabad, Chagas Nehi. So in general, and the way they manifest to one another, they're called in 3 general categories: Chabad, Chagas, and Nehi. Aval be'emes, but in truth, when you break it down, kol b'china b'fnei atzma klul miyud. Each separate entity, each separate level, is encompassed of all 10. So in general, Chabad, Chagas, Nehi, but when you break it down, each one has all 10 in them. Actually, what I just said, the explanation, he says now in the parentheses. Ubir in Yonam, and what's the beer? Because this is just the Kabbalah, what it says in Eitz Chaim. What does it mean? So I just explained it, so I jumped the gun actually, but let's read it inside. So the inyan, what's the inyan in this? Mavur b'kama duchtin, or b'kama drushin, it's explained in a number of discourses. The hachachma shebechabad hu etzem askolas v'asorgas ha'inyan. The chachma within Chabad is the very core of an idea and the comprehension of something, like the kernel, the seed. And the midas is what I said, the intellectual, the cognitive excitement. Not just the pure comprehension, but the fact that there's a certain excitement involved, but it's intellectual excitement. Like I explained. Nehi is already how it's being transmitted, not within you, but it's already being implemented. Hashpa milabar means outside of the person. Megufa. Labar megufa, nehi is like the legs that extend outside the body, so to speak. That's like the takeaway message, so to speak. The result. What I called before, behavioral. Ubeprotius, actually, this parentheses I see is not a short. No. Ubeprotius, yesh b'zeh kama madregas, and when you break it down, this itself has a number of levels. And delve into what we learned earlier, which I've explained many times, is like mutfa, murgish, muskul, the three stages of maturity and development, from ibur, from pregnancy, to yanika, to nursing, to meichin, to intellect, which essentially is behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. Okay, so let's just make sure that this parenthesis, just keep in mind, goes all the way down till another good 10, 12 lines. Maybe even more. So he's now explaining this element of Chabad, Chagas, Nehi, how they're encompassed of one of another. And then he'll go back to the discussion that we're having here. So let's see here. Where shall we stop? And I'll read a little more. Ukamoy came b'chagas. That's in Chabad. So what did he establish? That in Chabad itself, you have concept, you have the emotional stimulation, excitement, but all within the moichin, in the mind, and you have the behavioral as the mind is conceiving, as the mind is visualizing or conceiving the bechein, the conclusion. But it's all within Chabad. Ukamay came b'chabas, chagas, the same thing in the emotions. In chagas, yesh b'chinas Chabad, shehu atam shel hamida. That's the reasoning behind the emotion. Why is it that you're attracted to this? What's the reason behind the love, or behind the discipline of Gvura, or behind the compassion or the beauty of Tiferes? The tam is the Chabad within Chagas. Kamei b'midas hachesed mitzad ha'ava. Like in the chesed, due to the love that's there. So the love has a reasoning behind it. Why you love God or you love something, there's a reason. We're not talking again about impulsive emotions that are wired biologically within us. We're talking about an emotion that's coming from intellect. So it's due to the mitzad ha'ava. That's the Chabad within Chagas. The Chagas, within Chagas, is hu etzem hachesed, mepnei shu teiv be'etzem. It's not a reasoning, it's the goodness of the goodness itself. The very kindness. Why? Because this person is a kind person. So that's the emotions within emotions. V'nehi hu sheba b'derech nitzachim v'heskem bilvad. Nehi is already not talking about the actual logic behind it or the emotions behind it, but rather just the determination and the heskem and the determination and heskem means, yes, the same idea. Nitzachim heskem bilvad. Like I said, it's more the result. That's the nehi within Chagas, that the emotions come to the conclusion that I'm going to implement it, and this is the determination that we're making. A determination with Nitzachon here doesn't necessarily mean victory. He means Nitzachon as in drive or determination.
So Hesken means like resolve.
Similar like Nitzachon. Could be resolve. Hesken can be resolve. Yeah, resolve is a good word. Yeah. Oi, another way of explaining it, Shenihi hu b'chinas hashpah b'poel. That Nehi within Chagas is the actual hashpah, not just the resolve or the determination, but the actual hashpah. Heskem we learned also earlier was consideration, but I wouldn't put that here. Here I don't think he means consider. Here he means resolve. Yeah, yeah. And finally, the same is in Nehi. Nehi also has all three. The Chaim ben Nehi, Shein Klei Hashpah. Nehi is already the Klei Hashpah, considered the actual application. Hariyesh be'em Hashpah. Hashpah is b'chinas Chabad v'Chagas. They also have within that hashpah, they have the level of Chabad and Chagas within that. As like he said before, the Nehi of Chabad becomes the Chabad of Nehi. So what does he say? Hashpah b'chinas Chabad v'Chagas. Ubeprotius, he explains it now, breaks it down. B'chinas Chabad v'Chagas behem u'kamoy b'netzach. I'm going to take an example. Netzach is the first of Nehi. Netzach Heid Yesod. So break it down. What is it like by Netzach? Shu ha'heskim, which is the resolve, the determination. Yesh b'zeh beis madreges. In this resolve, there are two levels. Ha'echad heskim haba la'achri amida shal pitam v'das. One is the determination or the resolve that comes after a midah that is a logical midah, a rational midah. You come to the determination that this is the right person, let's say, to marry. Or you come to the determination that this is the right person to do business with. Or that a person you want to have a relationship with, you like them. But it makes sense. You did research, you did your due diligence. And you come to the heskim that this is the heskim lachlamida amida shal pitam v'das ukamay had a shimush initial al kol hayim. He's giving now an aveda that after a person davened, and in the davening they get stimulated. So that leaves a trace throughout the entire day. From the contemplation and the awakening of love and reverence during davening. You can't have that intensity of love and reverence as you have it in davening. So what happens? What remains is the conclusion of it. You came to a very strong resolve and determination that in actuality, in behavioral, you are going to avoid anything negative and only do what God wants, good things, in actuality. So the very passion and dynamic emotions, that was during davening. But a heskem remains afterwards. That's Nehi. So that's Netzach, rather. That's Netzach. So Netzach, he says, is the heskem. So that's the first thing, a heskem that comes after you had a strong emotional reaction. Many times, for example, a person can be by Fabrengen, and you get very stimulated, very inspired. So even then, and you make a decision, I'm going to start learning Chassidus every day. So even though the inspiration may dissipate, and tomorrow you may not feel it quite the same way as you felt it, but the determination you made, the resolution you made, that's also a good word, resolution or resolve, that remains. So that's the first thing in Netzach, that heskem. Ta'agam, shu b'teikif, even though this resolve, this determination is intense, it doesn't have the energy and the vitality as Ava V'yira, as Chagas has. The truth is, he says, Beis Madregas. Aleph, what's the Vahabeis? I'm sorry. Vahabeis, what's the second thing in Netzach? Who heskim belvad, shehiskim believers list. No, you know what? I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Got confusing here. Let's correct myself. The first level is, it's not the very emotion, but it still has vitality from the emotion and from the contemplation during davening. That's the first level of netzach and heskem. Beis, the second, is what I just said. Hu heskem bilvad. It doesn't even have that vitality anymore altogether. It is simply shehiskim beliboy liasur mezav aseite b'pel mamish. Dagam shu b'tekef, even though it's intense, mekol mokim ein b'ze'er v'chayis. It doesn't have that energy and vitality. Bottom line is that both of them are not the emotion, the chagas itself. They're both already a step away, but one still carries a trace of the vitality, and the other one is just purely resolution, no vitality at all. It's intense. It's a betekif. It's a real commitment, but it doesn't carry the v'chayis. So this is another way of explaining. He said, "Oy, sheniyu b'chinas hashpa b'pel." I'm sorry, v'chein b'nisha. Yeah. So the Chabad and Chagas within the he just explained Chabad and Chagas within Netzach. The contemplation is Chabad. The emotional stimulation, like during davening, is Chagas. And that led to a level of Netzach, either one of two ways. Either there is some vitality in that Netzach, in that resolve and determination, or there isn't any vitality. U'kamoi came b'hoid, and the same thing we'll talk about hoid. Netzach hoid. So he says, so in also hoid yeshei do shemitzad atam v'asaga. There's an acknowledgement that's not just an acknowledgement; it's coming from Chabad. There's a reason and a comprehension behind this. Why you're acknowledging? Why you're saying moidani or saying hoida? V'yeshei do she'en b'zeh asaga klal. And then there's just simply acknowledging something. You accept it even if you don't have any understanding of it. So you see also in Hoid, there's Hoid, the Chabad within Hoid, and then there's Hoid in Nehi that the Chabad is not revealed there. Here he doesn't bring Chagas, but you could explain the same thing. You could have an emotional reason, emotional drive why you're acknowledging something, or you could have it you're just acknowledging something simply out of Kabbalah sale. So bottom line is explained in this parentheses that in Chabad you have Chabad Chagas Nehi, in Chagas you have Chabad Chagas Nehi, and in Nehi you have Chabad Chagas Nehi. He didn't explain Yesod, he only brought Netzach and Hoid in the final examples, but you could apply the same thing to Yesod, especially if you look in the Geras HaKodesh 15, where he speaks about these spheres, what they are. So Yesod there is his kashrus, but he doesn't mention it here, so I'm not going to go into it. But there he talks about Yesod as his kashrus, as bonding, as connecting. So this long parenthesis, relatively, is an explanation how Chabad Chagas Nehi have each one has all 10, has all the others within them. Okay. I'm going to stop here, even though it's still in the middle of the topic, but he's going to further explain and develop this, and then he's going to go back and explain the two different interpretations of Mikrah, Mishnah, and Talmud, how they apply to either Beriya, Yetzirah, Asiyah, Yetzirah and Beriya, or Chabad Chagas Nehi. But now that he's speaking how they all include each other, you're starting to see where he's going here. He's going to show how all of them have the others in them as well. But then there's the prominent feature that each one has that makes it stand out. So I'll stop here. Any questions? If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take questions. And if not, we'll stop here. At the end of the parentheses, where he talks about Heidah. Lag B'Emer is Hoid Sheba Hoid. That's why he talks about it there. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So we'll stop here at the end of the parentheses. It's like 2/3 or 3/4 of the way down the page.